Good morning and happy Saturday, everybody. I'm so excited to have you all here. Today we're going to be talking with Lydia Manthis, and the topic is teaching therapeutic dance with refugees in Iraq and around the world. Recognizing your talents, identifying areas of need, and having the confidence to make a difference. So I know that a lot of followers are dance teachers or personal friends of mine who just are looking to get involved and who love sharing their passion and their joy of dance with the community. And so this call will hopefully be very insightful for you all to know how to get more involved using the talents that you have, and also how to make connections so that you can go abroad or even within your community and be able to make that difference that you've wanted to always make, because we all have talents and we just have to not be scared to take that first step right now. Hey everyone who's joining. Also feel free to ask questions during the duration of this real talk. All questions are accepted and really appreciated as well, so we can kind of move the conversation in the direction that might help you all on your journeys as well. Hey!
Hello! Hi!
Happy Saturday! I'm so excited to have you here on the talk, and I hope that you are really pumped and excited to share your story, because I'm so excited to hear all your story as well.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's so good to be here and get to connect with everyone virtually right now. It's so exciting. Well, hi everybody. Like Christine said, my name is Lydia Mathis. And I'm a dancer. I have 20 years of dance training. That kind of concluded for me with getting a degree at Belhaven University in dance, with focuses in community engagement. And so right now I'm talking to you from Omaha, Nebraska. This is where I have been during the pandemic with my family. I've been teaching dance school that didn't shut down, which has been super fun. But I'm here to talk to you mostly about being a cross-cultural dance teacher and these different experiences that I've had in a few different locations, with bringing dance as an international relational tool, but also a tool for hope and healing with vulnerable populations and displaced people. So I'm really excited to kind of share some of my story with you. Again, like Christine said, put any questions that you might have in the comments below, and we will try and get to those as well. So like I said, I have a degree in dance from a university, and a big focus in that for me was community engagement, and that's something that I would love to start talking about, because community engagement is something for the dance field that we are using a lot more of, like we're using that name, and so I just wanted to give that a little definition for those who are less familiar with what that means. So community engagement is this idea and this streamline in dance that we can use dance as a tool to engage with people that are not in our field. And so for me, I've been doing these international projects in other places like the Middle East and India. I've worked in Costa Rica. And I've been able to use dance as a tool in those places alongside nonprofits and other like children's programming as kind of a supplement, but then also as a therapeutic tool. So it's just a little intro.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So moving forward, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, your journey from university to the experiences you've had outside of university, and then how that brought you to where you are right now? And as you're talking about that, just, I guess, connecting the similarities with these different cultures and how dance is perceived by people, because for those non-dancers that are joining, and I see a few on right now, hi friends, dance is really a tool of communication, and it's a way to express how you feel, and it's healing in so many ways. And of course there's dance therapists that help create healing that's clinically deemed healed, but also dance is a way that like God created for us in the arts to express ourselves and to move closer to who the Lord is. So just integrating that into your talk so that we can get a better idea of also how dance can be used for those non-dancers.
Definitely. So I decided to go into dance as a degree choice, less so because I was interested in performance. I do love performing, but that wasn't my passion per se. I love working with people. And so my initial pursuit was looking at how we use dance as therapy or going into the dance therapy field. And that's kind of since changed a little bit for me. But that idea and that passion is still kind of has this through line for me. And I think it's amazing because I'm hearing more and more and more that there's this interest from like outside the dance community of people who want to know what's going on and why dancers are the way that they are and how we use that art as a means of communication. Like you see dance and music videos now, and you see it just all over kind of the popular art scene right now. But then similarly inside the dance field, all these dancers, especially with COVID, like we don't have these same performance opportunities. So everyone's saying like, okay, how do I engage with the world with what I have and with my gifts that I've been training so hard, because dance is super hard and it takes so much effort and so much energy to put into. And so when you come to a place where you're like, okay, I need to figure out how I use this in the bigger world, like outside of my field. I think that's a place that a lot of dancers are finding themselves in right now. And so looking at that engagement, again, coming back to this idea of community engagement, is super important for everybody, I think, in this moment. So for me, when I was working in college, I was doing my degrees, I was also really interested in international relief work. And so I have a community that I know of and family members that work in the Middle East in Iraq. And so for me, that's kind of the community that I chose to first invest in and to understand. So I get a lot of questions of like, oh, if we're going to do international work, how do I start that? And I think it's important that as a dancer, if you're wanting to start a dance program, that you understand that the very first step is always like a relational connection. It's not necessarily to just show up with your ballet shoes and like your curriculum and all your lesson plans. Like the first thing is always just to understand the community that you're going to engage with, whether that's.
And if I can just Oh, I'm sorry. If I can add right there, for anyone who's really specifically interested in how to do community engagement, where it's not a nonprofit and it's a community initiative, if you want to watch the talk that we did with Sean Lent, it's on her Instagram, and she was talking about exactly what Lydia is saying right now, that you don't want to always start, you don't want to start a new wheel, right? You want to engage with the community and make sure that you are connecting with someone who has a connection there, because you also don't want to do something that's harmful to the community, and you might think it's great to dance there, but maybe the way that you are doing it is not the way that the community will accept it and even want to have it. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue.
No, that was such a good note. That's so true. Again, that first step is always, whether it's in your community or a community that you're reaching out to, or you have the opportunity to engage with another place, you need that relational connection. And we'll get back to that first and about just practical ways and how you can make that happen. But for me, I had family that was living in the Middle East. And I got connected with this nonprofit, and I actually took 3 trips to Iraq before I actually implemented a dance program and was able to do that. And so that gave me this opportunity to be fully immersed in this culture, to really understand it and to understand the needs that were going on. And so it wasn't my primary goal to go in as a dance teacher, but after being there and after working with a trauma therapist who was in this community that I was working in, and a community director, they were the ones who said, okay, like you're a dancer and we think that this could be a good program for us. And so it was really about this connection with these people who were so much more knowledgeable than I was in the needs of that community. Like it was that partnership that really allowed that to happen for me. So I was working in northern Iraq with the Yazidi people, the displaced Yazidi people. So over the last 7 years, the Middle East has seen the biggest displacement of people. It has like passed like world records just because of all of the political and social and like terrorist activity that has been going on. So many people have lost their homes, their villages, their cities, their towns have been destroyed. And so there's just been this mass migration of people in the Middle East over the last 7 years. And so the community that I was working in, they're both an internally displaced community as well as a refugee community. So some of them were from Iraq, but their cities were destroyed. And others of them had migrated from either Syria or surrounding areas and were there for refuge. That's why we call them refugees. So I was working directly in a camp. So all of the people that I was working with were living in tents at this time. Many of them still are. But the program that I was working in, they had a community center that was centered right in the middle of this camp. And again, what really allowed me to kind of take the first steps in building my program that I got to implement in 2017 was just working alongside this trauma therapist and saying, like, here's what I know about dance. Here's what I know can be successful. Here's what I know about teaching children specifically, because that's the program we were building. But what do I need to know about how to do this well for these kids? And the really beautiful thing about that program is it was less so of talking directly to these kids about their trauma and what they'd gone through, because what they needed at that time was not to relive the displacement and the like mass trauma that they had gone through as refugees and as people who had lost many family members, and several of the children had been in like terrorist captivity, like just really like big T trauma. So the goal of my program was not to sit down and do like talk therapy with them, or even to like, let's dance out your trauma. Like that was not the goal. What the goal was to give them an avenue to just be kids again, to really engage with those like developmental skills that you need that can come through creativity and through movement, through engaging with your body. And so in a lot of ways, like it was just like teaching a regular creative movement class, just with an extra layer of intentionality around their specific needs. So we got to do that program in 2017 and it was amazing. We did 5 weeks for that program. And then it just kind of opened all of these doors for me to be able to do similar programs in different places and to partner with other nonprofits. And it also opened the door for me to work with the nonprofit that I'm working for now. So I now work for an organization called Hope Partners International. For those of you who are watching all of the Real Talk series, Ashley, who spoke in the last conversation, she's one of our country directors with Hope Partners. And so I've worked directly with her and also got to work in other locations like India and teach dance. So that's kind of where I am now.
Amazing. And along the way, well, I guess going back a little bit, can you describe more the situation of what it looks like to live in a refugee camp? Because the only experience and knowledge that most people have on that is pictures that they have seen. And we know that pictures don't tell the full story. And sometimes they tell the skewed version of the story. So can you share with us what it is like to actually, for one of these children, for example, to live in in a refugee camp and kind of maybe a little day, if you were walking through a day with one of these children, and also what it looks like?
Sure, yeah. So this was back in 2017, and the major conflict that displaced a lot of these families was in 2014. So it's a really interesting, this specific situation was a really interesting time because they had been displaced for a long time. So things like when you see pictures in the media of refugees, specifically in the Middle East, a lot of times you see that like initial huge crisis that they're going through as far as like they have nothing, like they don't have a home, they're not established. But the reality for a lot of refugees in this specific arena is that they're now very established, yet they're still displaced. So they don't have a home. There are like reconstruction projects going on in a lot of villages and cities to try and get these people back home, but that's a really slow moving process. And so a lot of them don't have a lot of hope. Like that's a big issue that stems around like the family unit as just like this sense of hopelessness and depression, because there's not a one day we will have a home mentality. Like that idea of hope is just missing in a lot of these personal and individual scenarios. So for the children, because that was kind of my focus, when it comes to using dance, they are kind of born into or have been thrust very early in life into this situation. And so for some of the children, they don't know any different. They don't remember having an actual home, but they're born into a family dynamic where hopelessness is the norm, and there's not a standard of goodness or a standard of having what they need. And so when we're coming from a mental health standpoint, that just creates a lot of insecurity. Like, it's very natural that even the children will have manifestations of their parents' mental health issues. But it's a really good conversation to look at, like, this idea of community trauma is the conditions that people in these situations, and I think something we could talk about, refugees across the board are going through, is this community trauma and this community displacement. Even though their individual stories can be very different. So, yeah, and the kids that I worked with, again, they had a variety of different stories. Like, some of them, again, had been in, like, terrorist captivity, whereas others of them hadn't been. They had just had to flee from their families, but all were affected in various ways. So for these kids, they have schools that are like different organizations in different countries are kind of coming in, and like maybe like the German government is taking care of like the education system for these kids, or and then like France will come in and they'll provide water for the specific camp. So it's a very cool environment to get to see all of these different agencies, including all these local workers coming together to care for a vulnerable group of people. So in those ways, like, those needs when I walked into this experience were met, like all of the basic needs. Like, they had food, they had the very bare minimum to get by. So that allowed the program that I was working in and the community center that I was at to kind of look at, like, okay, how can we advance from the bare minimum of like crisis mode into like giving them something to keep living and hoping and address those mental health issues. So yeah, so our kids, especially my youngest ones, they would wake up and we would have a younger class first. And so a lot of the older siblings would wake up, do all their chores or do whatever they needed for their family. And then the older kids would bring in the little kids and they would take class, like almost like a mommy and me kind of setting, with their little siblings. And then we would break and we'd have either a tea break, because that's very cultural. Everyone needed to have tea after any activity. And then the older kids would take the little ones back and usually like put them down for a nap, or give them to their parents, depending on what the situation was. And then the older kids would come back and they would take class with me. And so it was a huge blessing. And my class sizes grew exponentially. So we didn't know for that population if it was going to take right away, like if this idea of a dance class was going to be successful. But every day, everyone was bringing their cousins and their sisters and their brothers and their friends. And so I think I had 60 kids in a class by the peak of our numbers. And I think dance, again, specifically for this population, was really interesting because culturally, they weren't performing any of their traditional dances as a sign of like grievance and of mourning. So we had to be careful because we didn't want to disrespect the fact that they were going through what they were going through, and that even as it had been 3 or 4 years, like they were still grieving and they still were in the state of hopelessness. So we initially said that we were doing movement classes. And then after the kids kept coming and they started bringing their little dance routines and practices back home, the parents came and they were the ones that were like, thank you for giving our kids an opportunity to dance again. Like, thank you for giving them a reason to laugh and to play and to do these things. So that's when we really started to see how dance, even though as a culture they had said, we can't do this right now, how it kind of broke this barrier for the children and for even the parents' desire for their children to be able to step into a place of healing.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And well, one other question. I know in refugee populations, a lot of times, for example, in the United States, the government will help them find jobs so that they can get on their feet. What does it look like in a refugee camp? So when these children are not in the dance class and are not in their education school class, where are they home with their parents? And when the children are at their activities, where are the parents
Yes, that's a great question. Again, I think there's a lot of cultural implications around that. So, my kids, as far as their job responsibilities, they didn't necessarily have that ability to go out and to work for their family. Like there might be that expectation, but they couldn't do that until they were teenagers. So there weren't a lot of teenagers who were available, to step into this arena of dance because a lot of them were going out, and trying to get jobs.
So out of the refugee camp, they're going to find jobs.
Yes, the teenagers definitely were. And then the parents, like women in that culture are generally like they stay in the home and they take care of the family. But a lot of the either men or women, like in a family dynamic, there was a lot of like single parent situations because a parent had died or their life had been taken and in the crisis. And so in that case, then like the mother may have to find work. And so she may be gone from the situation, but usually the father was absent, and the mother might be struggling from some really severe mental health issues. So a lot of the children that I was working with, the responsibility that they were working on was actually just raising their younger siblings. So most of the families there are pretty large. Like they continue to have children, even in the camps. And so these older children, like I said, their primary responsibility was usually looking after 3 or 4 younger siblings. And so that's kind of what they were doing. And so we created a space in our community center. We called it a child safe space. So there was always room for, even if if all of the children from one family came, the little ones would have a space to be taken care of while the older ones were able to do something like have a dance class, which in and of itself for their family situation would just be considered a luxury, because these children who are, 7, 8, 9, 10, like those are still little kids in our perspective, but those are the kids who are raising the 1, 2, 3-year-olds. And so giving them the freedom and the space to have a moment where they can focus on their own bodies and themselves and their own needs was also a really, really pivotal point for this program.
Wow, and also being able to meet those needs and recognize that if you want the older child to be able to participate in dance class, you need to provide child care for the younger children.
Exactly.
There's so many perspectives to take into consideration. So many things that are happening at once, and also a different question. So moving more into the how therapy was used as you were teaching dance. So you were working with a trauma therapist, which maybe you can speak to that. What the aspects of dance were you pulling on, and the trauma therapist advised you to more focus on for children who are going through trauma or post-trauma situations?
Yeah. So it was a huge, huge blessing and like privilege to be able to have access to this trauma therapist, because that's not, I know, something that everyone will have when they're creating their programs and when they're creating curriculum. But the thing about it was that the things that she told me to do were not out of my range, if that makes sense. So I always get excited to share these things, because it sounds like when I said like, oh, I worked with a trauma therapist, that it was some like, again, this very clinical, like scientific experience, but really she just highlighted and reemphasized and reaffirmed like, no, like the basic things that we bring to a creative movement class or to a ballet class or to a modern class are helpful for these children who have undergone trauma. The important part is just how we communicate that and how we approach their space in giving them that. Because a lot of times, anyone who's going through trauma, they need structure, but they need also safety. So, and that structure always has to be reinforced by the sense that we're creating safety. And that's true of like all children throughout development. Like that's not even specific to kids who have undergone trauma, but if you are someone who has had a really traumatic experience, your sense of security and safety has been completely stripped away. And so if we're being intentional with dance, then we're using dance as a tool to bring that back to them. And to create a safe environment. But even for our normal students, if they don't have a sense of security or safety in their home life or even in the studio space directly, like they won't have a successful dance life because they won't be able to connect to themselves, their body, to you as a teacher, just because they will be like neurologically, they will only be focused on trying to create a sense of security, which can sometimes look like unwanted behaviors in a dance class. So yeah, but very simply, asking children in a big group setting, in a class setting, to breathe, like that's a huge thing that we have to use in dance in order to do it, because it's a physical exertion. So even when you get them playing and when you get them moving, they're having to be more aware of how much breath they're taking, and that in and of itself can be such a healing thing. So again, when we're doing warm-ups and we're saying like, okay, like let's get that cardio going, like that in of itself is a very healing thing for children with trauma. Giving creative.
Can you explain why? Why?
Yeah, so breath is it's this just very human centered thing, right? But again, for children who have had trauma, there's this disconnect between like the mind and body. And so in that disconnection, and that can come from a variety of reasons. Like, again, we can get real deep into the neurology behind that. But the main point is that there's just been a disconnect. And so when you breathe, like there's literally this intake of oxygen from an external source that comes into your body and allows everything to kind of find its equilibrium again. And in your your nervous system, it can't operate in a state of like level-headedness. Like you can't think clearly if you have anxiety, right? And that's all about your nervous system. So nervous system regulation has to do with breath. And when we are experiencing negative behaviors with any child in a classroom, they're usually having a nervous system reaction. Again, like whether they're crying, whether they're pitching a fit, whether they're having an actual anxiety attack, like that's all having to do with the nervous system, which is in the body. And that can be reinforced by their thoughts. And so a lot of times as teachers, we try to speak directly to like their brains and like, no, you need to calm down, think happy thoughts. Like you have to like engage with the class. But as dancers, we have this gift to know, okay, like let's talk to the body right now. And talking to the body has to start with this idea of regulation through the breath. So, so creating those pathways through physical activity is a super helpful way to do that. And again, if we're looking through for ways to do that, then you just have to teach them like, okay, when we run fast, like that's going to give us a moment for like all that energy to release. And then again, we'll find our breath again. So learning as a teacher for your class and for your age group, how to do that, like how to really get them like moving and moving and moving and then like stop. Like that's a big thing. Cause then you'll hear as a teacher that, and they're again, regulating their nervous system. But this is something that we do in dance already, like whether we are aware that that's what's happening or not, like that's something that's already naturally there. So that's the biggest thing in any dance class that you can do with more intentionality, to just understand where your kids are. And instead of trying to like control and hinder their energy, like give them a breathing structure that they can use throughout, especially if you're working with a non-dance community, like the goal should be a little bit less about like, let's get this specific technique or this specific training out of the way. And like more so, how do we look at how to creatively engage with our bodies and with our breath and with who we are, and then kind of the social dynamic of that class. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And also, it just shows the intrinsic values that dance has in itself, that the trauma therapist is telling you there's not much that you have to shift, just more how you're teaching it, as I'm assuming that means encouraging and uplifting to the children and creating a safe space. Then dance in itself is already something that will help the children move forward. And that's really beautiful just for all dancers to hear and be affirmed of, because we know it, we can feel it, but we can't always explain it or have it in words. So it's really nice to have that confirmation from you for the dance community and your experiences working with children who are living in or have experienced extreme trauma and all of the baggage that goes along with it. And also, as you said, if they're living in a state of perpetual hopelessness, that means a lot of times when they go home, maybe they see their mom or their single mother or father crying. And if you're a child and you're growing up and you're meant to grow up with joy, and you just see your parents crying over and over again, that also might cause the child to put themselves in that state because you're following your parental guide. And I see that even here with some of my children from trauma. They're just like reflecting these difficult situations that the parents are continuously living in, a state of maybe hopelessness, but scars from the past that have not been able to be healed.
Mm-hmm.
And something that children also carry along with them, although it's not their weight maybe to carry because they didn't experience it themselves, but something tangentially that's still impacting them every day. So I don't know, maybe you can share an example of a child who you saw a difference in that shift of mentality from when you first came and started the program to when the program took its course, and maybe a parent's testimony that they shared with you, this has made a difference or this has made an impact, just so that the audience can kind of have a more of an understanding, because something like a refugee camp is very foreign, the idea, at least to me.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a little girl, and her name is Nazik, and I love telling her story. So she is, at the time of this dance class, she's 8 years old. And again, she fits that mold of that situation that I was speaking of earlier. She's 8. She has, I think, 4 or 5 siblings, as well as some little cousins that she's looking after. And she's not even the oldest in her family, but she has taken up this responsibility that she's not going to let anything bad happen to her, like what is under her influence, if that makes sense. So basically her younger siblings. And I think the youngest was like 1.5, like barely like toddling around. And then we had like a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, you know, like everyone in that younger situation. And so her way of coping with the trauma that was happening in her community and her family was kind of a very like shut down and like hyper aware and controlled response. And so she actually came to my class because her little siblings wanted to, like they were the ones who heard about it and engaged with it. And they, again, didn't have kind of that as evident response to the trauma they were experiencing, because a lot of their needs were being absorbed and taken care of by her. And her family, her parents, I had the opportunity to spend some time with them. They weren't like neglectful parents by any means, but they had some other family members that were having such severe symptoms of trauma. So like one of her aunts would faint like several times. We call that a psychosomatic response to the trauma that she was experiencing. And her father was out trying to provide, you know, food and income. He was very stigmatized in their community, in the place that they had to flee from. It's very difficult for them to find work and to find jobs. And her mom was her older sisters who were also having symptoms of trauma, as well as her aunts. So this little girl, 8 years old, has all of this responsibility on her plate, but she knows that what is happening above her in her family situation, she doesn't have control over. To do is to completely like shut off her needs or her childhood, if you will, in order to take care beneath her, to try and bring that sense of security to them and to herself, that sense of regulation. So for class, and again, the community is known as a very safe space in the community, which is great, and that's not something I think that was established because of this organization that I was working with. So she comes here and she brings her little class, and me and my translator that I was working with, also very important to have someone there who is, you know, actually can speak the language and can help be a co-facilitator. That's super
I'm sorry,
important.
it's cutting out a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Lydia. About 3 seconds.
No, that's okay.
Could you maybe speak a little bit slower and move less?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. What was the last thing that you heard, Christine?
The last thing I heard was you were working with a translator, which is very important.
Right. Yes. So later, and myself noticed this little girl, Nazik, and we really wanted her to be able to experience the class of our older. But we knew that we would have to explain to her and help her understand that we would, again, give her the safety that her little kids would need for her to be able to separate herself from them, because she was very strongly tied to their safety as well. So, and she didn't come the first day, she didn't come the second day, and then by the third day we had a pretty large class of girls her age, and she showed up to the class and allowed one of our other workers to look after her younger siblings while she took class. But for her to engage in the things that we were doing, like we were doing a lot of creative movement exercises, we were doing a lot of community building within the class. So asking the girls to like do different movement tasks together. And like, there was a lot of like, like we would connect physically with each other by holding hands and just doing different things together, but then also introducing some ballet framework and some different things that made them feel really good and made them feel really important and made them feel really pretty. Asking her to do that was really challenging for her because it was asking her to focus on herself and to allow herself to be important in and of herself in that space. And she had such a hard time with this at first. She had such a hard time, like when the other girls would like laugh and play and smile, she would like, you could see in her body, like she would physically like get a little bit nervous around this. So I noticed this pretty early in the class, and I just realized that like she didn't need me to push her to participate in the class at all, but what she needed is just subtle encouragements. And she was very like success driven, like she wanted things to be right and she wanted to be right. And so when you're in an environment where everyone else seems to be thriving and you're not, like that was also scary for her. So what I learned to do is just to very gradually, like I would come alongside her and not make her feel like she was the focus of attention, but do things with her, or like hold her hand while we did an exercise, and then make sure that she got the affirmation that she needed upon like doing the smallest things. And so very gradually as we did this and like worked and she came every day and more and more and more, like there was just this tiniest smile that would like kind of like crack on her face every time like something would go right, or someone would do something silly, or someone else would fall down, and like she noticed like, oh, doing the right thing in this space isn't being in control, or it's not being perfect, but being right in this space is just allowing myself to have the freedom to experience joy. Like that was what was being right. But it took her a minute to understand that she could take that freedom for herself and fully embody it and step into it. And so by the end of our like 5 weeks, she was like one of my top students as far as she would participate doing everything. She learned that she could help other students to learn how to do things so she could still have that big sister role that she was very accustomed to. But she first had to embrace it for herself and embrace being in that class and embrace like giving herself a moment to just smile and be silly or be creative or work really hard at learning how to do like chaînés across the floor. So it was just this very slow, relational, integrated process for her. But it was one of the most amazing things to watch. And it's not that I took away her trauma. It's not that I was able to transform her life, but it was just giving her the skill to understand that she could trust herself, to embrace some freedom in her own body, in her own existence. And that's something that she could take outside of the classroom and keep doing.
Yeah, definitely. And for her to realize that she's worth taking up space and that her laughter is important and wanted and by her peers, and that they enjoy laughing with her. That actually, listening to you share that, it reminds me of when one of my students, actually a few of my students, when the COVID quarantine began here about like in March, some of the children from the orphanage, I was on the phone with them. And they said, Miss Christine, I miss when you scold us, because when I scold them in the dance class, and especially in the integrated dance classes, it's like, that was wrong. And it's like everyone laughs together. And then like, I think it's a moment where the children are realizing, it's okay to not have done it right. So I'll like that was wrong in this like crazy way. And the kids are like, well, I might have done it wrong, but Miss Christine is crazy. And so we're all laughing. And then I go over there and take their hand. And then I have one of the other girls help this other girl achieve it. And so then they don't feel bad when they are doing it incorrectly. And they feel good because when they achieve it, they know that at least their friends are there to help them achieve it. And they didn't get singled out for doing it incorrectly. So it was really beautiful to hear that children around the world have the same type of experiences in the dance classroom, you know. Like it all depends on the teacher too, because some teachers, when you do it wrong, you feel like shamed and you feel less beautiful and you feel less empowered. But if your teacher's there to show you that it's strides forward from where you are at, wherever you are at, that is such an empowering, uplifting perspective that you can then, as you said, bring outside of the dance classroom. And as so much research is showing, and then also research that even Mind Leaps did by Dr. Mick Sherry in 2015, it was showing how dance in the classroom has helped increase and can help increase your cognitive function, which then has direct implications for school and academics and how you can succeed in life. And I was reading this other study from 2012 by Dr. Perry, and it was just sharing how trauma can, of course, trauma changes your brain and how it functions and how it develops. But if you're in a positive, supporting, uplifting environment, doing something where you can feel positive and safe in, that can help switch trauma in young children. And it's so beautiful because dance can do that. There's so many dancers out there, they think, oh, so my dance career, my dance career, my dance career, because it's true. To become a professional dancer, you need to invest every minute, almost every minute of your free time in yourself, and it does become hedonistic. But the question is, in that journey for yourself, how can you also spend some time to use the talents that you have in that for others, so that it's not just me, and by the time that you get to like the mid 30s or the late 30s, you're like, okay, now there's time for other people. But in that journey, how you can work with other people and build a community, so it's not just yourself doing an entire project, because that is a lot of work. And if you're trying to make it as a dancer, there is not time to have a separate project, because your project is training your body and your mind to be able to do these unnatural things, which are beautiful, and so many of us love and are addicted to that feeling of dancing and moving and being able to perform as well. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to know, let's see, is there any questions from anybody who's watching? And if anyone has a question, feel free to leave it here below. And also, Lydia, if you can give us any, I guess, last summarizing comments about your experiences abroad and really how you were able to take that step to make a difference and to use dance, situation where you didn't know if your talents could be useful, how realizing that they were made an impact in many lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, again, I get this question all the time, is like, how do I start? How do I start doing something? And how do I, again, figure out what community engagement looks like for me and my own dance practice? And it's such an important and beautiful question. Like, I love it when people are in that place, because again, they have stepped into this mindset of like, I know I have all these tools as a dancer. I don't always have the words for them because it's so embodied and it's so like, it's this rhythm that I can engage with, but now I'm realizing that I want other people to experience that, whether they've had the dance training that I've had or not. And so I think even just being in that place of like, what do I do next, even though that can be really frustrating, is a really beautiful place to just begin as a dancer. And so again, I think that, like you were saying, it's not necessary for you to have to travel halfway across the world. Some people out there, that will be the thing that they do, and that's beautiful. And I know of several other cross-cultural workers and organizations who are embracing dance, and that's great. But if that's not something that you feel that you have access to, then you just need to know how to, again, take that step outside of your own training and outside of yourself to engage with the community that you're in. And you may get a lot of no's. Like, people may think that you're a little crazy for wanting to do something with dance, but you will be so shocked by the amount of open doors in your community. who are open to having a dance program for kids. Like children's programming specifically, like there's always going to be a need because there are always going to be children. And when you have a group of children, people are always looking for people who can just step up and like arrive in that space. And when you can do it with like a level of physical knowledge, when you can do that with like compassion and creativity, like you have so much to give. So looking at your community, looking at what are the issues of your community. So like, is there a marginalized population? Like, are there refugees where you live? Like, those are really important questions to ask. And those just require some really good Google searches of like the different organizations who are around you. Because it is not ever really a good idea to try and do something all alone and by yourself. Like, you are the dance teacher, you have this knowledge, but you need to match that knowledge with partnerships of the people around you who are already making a difference and stepping into those things, because that's going to be how you build the best practices for yourself and for your students. Like if you're connected with a studio and you want to start a community initiative, that's great. You can take that on, but also look for the other community initiatives that already exist, or the organizations that are working so hard to care for refugees and to vulnerable people, for marginalized people. Really ask questions about like accessibility, like who has access to dance in my community and who doesn't. And then the places where there's not access to dance, like those are the places where you want to start building those bridges. If you want to see like a really fulfilled community engagement program. So again, first practical step, do a Google search in your community of who's already there, who's already working, and then make some really brave calls and say, hey, I'm a dance teacher and I love your cause. I love your organization. How can I help? What can I do? They may have a need for you to come and do volunteer work that's not at all related to dance, but then that opens that door for you to be able to step in and do the next thing and do the next thing. Because again, where there's children's programming, they will want you to be able to step in and to breathe life into that. So that's my first like practical thing for anybody. For me, that happened with this international organization, because I was working with Samaritan's Purse. And I, again, started out as a volunteer. Like, it wasn't about getting paid. It wasn't about, getting the recognition that I got for that experience, even though people saw it and they told me that it was important. And I've been able to speak about it a lot. Like, that is great. But it was literally just this act of like, I want to be present with this community. Oh, I'm a dancer. Here we are. And that doing that alone, like other organizations found out what I do and they said, oh, please come work with us. Please come do this with our children. So if it is the thing that you are supposed to be doing, like the doors will open for you, because it is like the path of love and life that you're supposed to be walking in and down. But there's also an essence of like, it won't always be easy and those things won't always be given to you. Sometimes you have to sit and wait and really pursue the relational investment before you can pursue the dance investment. But I don't believe that God ever wastes anything. So if you have spent years and years and years of your life like absorbing this information from the dance field, there is an opportunity out there for you to be able to pour that out and give that to someone else in a way that will be equally as fulfilling, but will look so different than your dance training. I believe that so genuinely. And again, very practical step, like Christine has organized this amazing set of conversations for all these people who are working in this field, in this arena. So if you're out there and you're wanting to know more and you're wanting to engage, like keep talking with all these people, like send them Instagram messages, like be annoying if you feel annoying, but like do it, just have that conversation, because this work is an important work for our time and for the crises that are the pandemic and where we are as a society. Like, these are important conversations. So
those are such amazing final comments. So I need to like comment on the comments that you just shared. First of all, yes, making that brave call. And just to give people more of an idea, so if you're living in a city, there's obviously marginalized and underrepresented in society and in the education system. populations. So as if it's refugees or children in the inner city with high poverty, you know, there are so many also services that are created for children who are living in cities, like feeding programs. You can find this at the Boys and Girls Club. You can go to local churches. You can go to local libraries. All these places that provide resources and support for the community, especially the community that might be struggling financially or shifting into the United States if they're refugees. Now, if you're not in a city, it might be a little harder to I guess, identify what this population looks like. But if you're in a more rural area or even in a suburb area, this will look like those families who they hold multiple jobs, and so the children might be at some type of a subsidized daycare or after school program. You know, it doesn't have to be with a non-school related organization that you're working with.
Absolutely.
Because in cities it's easy to find nonprofits, and you can easily Google search it, which is way easier than 30, 20, 10 years ago, where now everything is on the internet, more than we want to be on the internet. But you can go to those local schools and just ask, are there children who would be interested in this? And it is a brave call, because you need to put yourself out there, and you might be rejected a few times, but that doesn't mean you're going to be rejected every time. And as Lydia was telling us, you know, God gave you these gifts, and if you have a passion to use them, don't be afraid to use them just because you think that someone is going to tell you no, and your dignity or pride might be a little bit hurt. But if you're not doing this for yourself, then who cares if your dignity or pride is a little bit hurt, right?
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
Yes.
And so also, as you said, you know, reach out to all the other speakers who have been on this series. Lydia's the last one, and it was a really good, this has been a really good talk to finish this series with. And thank you also, because I just reached out to you on Instagram. I was like, yeah. I think what you're doing is so interesting, and just if you would like to be on this call, and that's what it takes. And also nowadays that everyone has so much more time because they're inside or they're so much more connected and on technology, there's a lot higher chance that they'll actually respond to you. So don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is all. If you want to leave any last comments to inspire people as the last speaker of this Real Talk series, looking at refugees, displaced people, and how dance can be used to really bridge communities and the individual, feel free to share it.
I just want to say thank you to you too. And again, like Christine said, like making connections with people has never been easier. Like it always takes a little bit of effort, but yeah, I'm just really thankful for you, Christine, and for running your program, and then also being willing to facilitate all these conversations and make those connections, and not only make those connections for yourself to know who you can connect with in support of your goals, but say like, oh, this is so important that I want to support the goals of everybody else in this conversation and invite people in. So thank you so much for having me and for hosting this series of your Real Talks. It's been so good.
Of course, I'm so grateful to have had you on and all the other speakers, and it's beautiful because everything that you and all the other speakers have said, oh my goodness, my words. The base idea is always whatever you're doing, do it in love and do it listening to the other person's needs. Because if you just go in there with a hard head, then you're not going to get your goals done. And also always questioning, are these your goals or are these the goals that the community wants and that the community can thrive from and through? So always keeping that in mind. So thank you so much, Lydia, for your time. Thank you, everyone who has listened and who is tuning in. And again, this was Real Talks and looking at refugees, displaced people, and dance. God bless, and have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. Bye.